In the wake of the devastating German onslaught during Operation Barbarossa and confronted with the largest invasion force in history, the Soviet Union was resolute in its determination to modernize technology and tactics to counter the Nazi threat. Facing formidable German aeronautical power, epitomized by cutting-edge aircraft like the Messerschmitt, the Soviets found themselves compelled to devise a solution using already outdated planes. This lesser-known chapter of World War II witnessed a spark of ingenuity. At its center was Vladimir Vakhmistrov, a leading Russian aeronautical designer who proposed a plan so radical that even the overwhelming might of Operation Barbarossa was caught off guard, and that's the Zveno project. The Zveno concept originated in the mid-1920s with Vakhmistrov. Envisioning the modification of a bomber with special docking brackets and umbilical fuel lines, he aimed to create a platform capable of carrying up to 5 additional fighter-sized planes into combat. In Russian, Zveno not only commonly describes a flight or unit of aircraft working in tandem, but also carries the contextual meaning of chain link or connected, providing an artistic description of Vakhmistrov's visionary concept. The Zveno stood out as a personal project for Vakhmistrov, representing just one among his many composite aircraft designs. Initially, he had presented sketches of the idea to his superiors at the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy during the completion of his degree. However, they dismissed his design as merely the product of an overly imaginative and underexperienced engineer. Aircraft carriers were not an entirely novel concept. Merely 7 years after the first successful fixed-wing aircraft flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, a significant milestone was achieved with a successful takeoff from a U.S. Navy vessel off the coast of Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. This accomplishment drew the attention of France, Britain, and Japan, prompting them to outfit specialized vessels with seaplanes for diverse reconnaissance and combat missions. The Zveno project marked a distinct departure from convention, setting the stage for a fascinating and largely unexplored chapter in the annals of aviation history.
Airborne aircraft carriers are often relegated to the realms of fiction, such as those in Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, or the helicarriers used by Marvel's S.H.I.E.L.D.
Even during the monoplane era, the majority of concepts related to airborne aircraft carriers and parasite fighters found their place primarily in fantasy illustrations published by Popular Mechanics or Popular Engineering. However, several real-life airborne aircraft carriers have existed. In 1917, the British Navy ventured into aviation innovation by experimenting with launching biplanes from their 23-class Vickers rigid airships, aiming to extend the reach and capabilities of naval aviation. In the early 1930s, the US Navy enthusiastically adopted the concept of airborne aircraft carriers by commissioning 2 Helian airships, the Akron and the Macon. These airships were equipped with the capacity to launch airplanes and showcase modern improvements, featuring a special trapeze and unique T-shaped docking bay. This groundbreaking setup enabled the airships not only to launch aircraft, but also house and service multiple planes. Despite the promising potential of these airborne aircraft carriers, both the Akron and the Macon met their ends in crashes during their service as reconnaissance vessels. Despite encountering setbacks, these airborne aircraft carriers presented an innovative approach with their aircraft retrieval system, streamlining the launch and docking of Navy aircraft and providing efficient storage inside the airship. The docking maneuver was simple enough for most pilots to attempt the procedure, and the dirigible stability made docking relatively safe in most conditions. However, the vulnerabilities of these airborne carriers to weather specifically became apparent with the crashes of both the airships and the well-publicized Hindenburg disaster. As seaborne vessels designed to carry aircraft became more prevalent and sophisticated, the development of airships for similar purposes faced constraints in terms of size and operational capacity. The historical context illuminates the evolving challenges and limitations confronted by early endeavors in the realm of airborne aircraft carriers. Vakhmistrov's vision stands out as the pioneering audacity to pair plane to plane in this ambitious pursuit. In 1931, Vakhmistrov's Zveno concept took a significant stride toward realization when the Soviet Air Force Research Institute granted him the opportunity to delve into the concept of composite aircraft. His inaugural design, later designated Zveno 1, featured a TB-1 bomber with 2 I-4 biplane fighters attached on top of the wings via a specially designed trapeze. This configuration, coupled with the frequent use of the term trapeze, led to the planes being playfully dubbed Vakhmistrov's Circus. The Zvenyo's proof of concept demonstrated a remarkable success. The modified twin-engine TB1 not only successfully took flight, but did so with two slightly modified I-4 fighters attached to the top of its wings. In the 1930s, a lack of wind tunnels for testing aircraft meant all Zvenyo tests relied on trial and error in the field, and this practical limitation initially made Soviet military leaders hesitant to support the project fully. Despite numerous successful tests in various configurations, the concept still seemed too limited in scale for Soviet military leaders who prioritized sheer numbers over specialized equipment in their tactics. Undeterred by these concerns, Vakhmistrov secured permission to continue with his project. By 1934, he introduced another operational concept, this time based on the more capable TB3 bomber. The Zvenyo 2 utilized the TB3's quad engines with a combined 2,000 horsepower to carry two all-metal I-5 fighters on top of the bomber's wings and a third on the bomber's spine. Mounting the third fighter proved to be the most challenging task. While the planes on the wings could be rolled into place using a ramp, the center I-5 had to be hoisted manually, requiring dozens of airbase staff to assist each time the configuration was tested. Due to this difficulty, the center fighter was seldom launched and in many cases functioned only as an additional manned engine for the TB3, with its tail and wings removed to reduce weight. During these tests, the Zveno configuration's true strengths became apparent. The trapezes not only enabled the bomber to carry its escort into action, but also allowed the attached fighters to be powered, contributing additional lift and speed to the mothership. By connecting to the bomber's substantial fuel tanks via umbilical fuel lines, the attached fighters could achieve this without depleting their own fuel reserves. This meant that the planes would detach over enemy territory fully fueled, significantly extending their operational range. However, some drawbacks were as conspicuous as the advantages. The absence of hangars capable of accommodating this unique configuration posed a challenge. Assembling the colossal setup in the open air made it vulnerable to enemy strafing or dive bombing. Nonetheless, Soviet military leaders took notice of the potential benefits, particularly in extending the range of their fighters. They were becoming increasingly aware of advancing aeronautical developments throughout the world that threatened to surpass their designs. The Zveno 3 ingeniously addressed military leaders' primary concerns with remarkable simplicity. Vakhmistrov incorporated the recently developed and then secret IZ fighter into the design, creating new hanging trapezes for the parasite aircraft. This innovative approach allowed them to be easily wheeled beneath the plane before takeoff, reducing the necessity for additional staff to make the Zveno flight ready. The experimental fighters, equipped with fixed landing gear, facilitated smooth landings and takeoff, while the configuration's adaptability enabled convenient preparation and storage within existing hangars. By August 1934, the Zveno 3 was ready for testing. This testing phase marked a turning point for the Zveno project as it encountered its first and only fatal incident. During one of the test flights, an issue arose with one of the IZ fighters, compelling the pilot of the TB3 to initiate an emergency landing. In a harrowing turn of events, the malfunctioning IZ became fully detached from its trapeze, somersaulting end over end and resulting in the tragic death of the fighter's pilot along with the destruction of the aircraft. Renowned Soviet test pilot Pyotr Stefanovsky recounts the incident in his autobiography 300 Unknowns. Despite the overall smooth progress of the test, the lack of experience of an IZ test pilot led to a collision with the bomber's wing mid-flight, triggering the catastrophic accident. Another test pilot distanced himself entirely from the Zveno project following the incident, succinctly expressing his sentiments as, "These acrobatics are not for me." The year 1935 unfolded as a significant chapter in the chronicle of Vakhmistrov's circus. Curiously, the Zveno 4 configuration never materialized or underwent testing for reasons unknown. However, the Zveno 5 configuration emerged as a pioneering achievement, showcasing distinctive piloting techniques that would not be paralleled by other nations for nearly a decade. This iteration featured TB3 with an elongated trapeze affixed to its belly, enabling smaller craft to dock mid-flight. Its inaugural test proved historic, marking the world's first mid-air docking between fixed-wing aircraft, a breakthrough that foreshadowed the commonplace practice of mid-air refueling today. Zveno 6 closely mirrored the Zveno 3 in form, yet it substituted IZ fighters with I-16s. The primary distinction lay in the I-16's retractable landing gear, streamlining takeoffs by minimizing drag. Launched for testing in August 1935, the Zveno 6 allowed for easy detachment of the fighters from the TB3, but lacked the capability for mid-air attachment. By Vakhmistrov's predictions, those I-16s, with their payload of two 250-kilogram bombs, would be the ultimate weapon for long-range precision strikes, and he wouldn't be entirely wrong. By the close of 1935, Vakhmistrov's visionary ambitions reached fruition. An adapted TB3 took flight on November 20th, carrying two I-5 fighters atop its wings and two I-16s beneath them. Following the initial takeoff, an IZ fighter affixed itself to the bomber's belly mid-flight. Although only grainy photographs document this clandestine project, their poor quality does little to diminish their striking historical significance. The success of these endeavors prompted Vakhmistrov to conceive yet another configuration known as Aviamatka, or Airborne mothership. Although never fully tested, the concept was robust. This configuration was designed to carry multiple fighters that could be fueled and serviced by a single TB3 with a maximum of 6 docking to the mothership while 2 others served as escorts. The escort fighters would rotate as needed, ensuring that all 8 could tap into the bomber's expanded fuel stores. In 1938, Zveno 7 delved into the feasibility of mid-air docking for 2 fighters. Although technically achievable with an extended trapeze similar to the Zveno 5 configuration, it was deemed too challenging, demanding highly skilled pilots in each of the 3 machines and extended periods of flight time. With the specter of war looming, Zveno was mothballed and consigned to storage during 1939 and 1940. The resources utilized in these experiments were redirected to fortify existing Soviet airfields throughout what would later become the Eastern Bloc. Despite the initial order of 40 Zveno configurations to be split between the Red Army and the Navy, only 6 Zveno SPBs, which stands for Combined Dive Bomber in English, were ultimately produced for the Black Sea Fleet. Stationed at Yevpatoria in Crimea, the unit earned the nickname Shubakov's Circus, named after its leader, Arseny Shubakov, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War and a skilled fighter pilot. In hindsight, the decision to hold Zveno research may seem peculiar, but it was a logical step in the context of the times. Soviet air bases in regions like Ukraine and Lithuania had to maintain a high state of alert to counter the looming threat of Nazi advances. The military strategists in Russia rightly perceived the gravity of Germany's occupation of Poland and the forced annexation of Austria. Recognizing just how behind they were in weapons research, the Soviet Union wisely redirected all available resources to support the defense of its westernmost holdings. The aviation landscape of the 1930s and 40s differed significantly from the present day. While modern fighters and bombers showcase relatively minor disparities in operational flight times thanks to their in-air refueling capabilities, the limitations imposed by weight considerations of compact and maneuverable monoplane fighters restricted their fuel capacity to cover only a few hundred kilometers before requiring refueling. In contrast, bombers possessed the remarkable ability to cover vast distances, sometimes extending into thousands of kilometers, without the need for refueling stops. This unique capability allowed bombers to surpass the operational range of even the most well-equipped fighters by over 5 times, and modifications could further increase this range. The Zveno system, by tethering fighters to bombers, not only utilized an external fuel reserve before deployment, but also kept the fighter's engines running during flight. This innovative arrangement increased the bomber's speed and also enhanced its fuel efficiency compared to its typical load. Unlike traditional bombers using carpet-style bombing techniques for broad strikes, the Zveno configuration empowered dive bombers to target individual objectives with precision, carrying a larger payload to hit specific targets. It also increased the payloads they could carry over 5 times the average dive bombers at the time, while increasing the flight time of the parasite fighters by over 80%. This optimized mission profile mirrored the effectiveness of contemporary cruise missiles in a world before the advent of guided weaponry. Featuring a maximum combat range of 2,500 kilometers and capable of reaching speeds of 268 kilometers an hour with an operating ceiling of 6,700 meters, the Zveno SPB was meticulously designed for the task of executing precision strikes deep within enemy territory. Its capabilities aligned seamlessly with the demands of the era's warfare, showcasing a fusion of innovative design and strategic foresight. As is too often the case, Vakhmistrov's teachers lacked the wisdom to see the brilliance of his youthful excitement when he showed them his first rough designs. In the summer of 1941, the Soviet military found itself caught off guard by the blitzkrieg advance of Operation Barbarossa. This was mainly due to Stalin's insistence that Soviet forces hold to the non-aggression pact despite obvious military movements by the Nazis. Responding swiftly to the unfolding crisis, Shubakov's Circus received the green light to commence operations on the 26th of June 1941, a mere 4 days after the Nazis began the largest military operation in history. In a daring mission over the Black Sea, 2 Zveno SPBs took flight, carrying 4 I-16 fighters armed with a combined payload of 2,000 kilograms of explosives. A mission destroying targets near the city of Konstantia, a crucial operation in the face of the escalating conflict. Fighter pilot Boris Litvinchuk described the sensation of riding in the parasite fighter in The Angry Sky of Taurus, a collection of Soviet Air Force biographies published after the war. To quote him, "A strange feeling. It was like being on a carousel as a child. I always chose the plane and got out of line if I saw that someone had already taken it." 40 kilometers off the Romanian coast, signal lights installed above each fighter's visor flashed attention. After a brief moment, the signal changed to release. With a nod to flight leader Shubakov, Litvinchuk pulled his release lever and glided away from the mothership nose down. The journey to the coast and entry into Romanian airspace proved strangely uneventful. As the I-16 approached its primary target, an oil depot in Konstantia, the Russian pilots couldn't help but hold their breath upon spotting Nazi fighters on the horizon. The Germans, assuming that the only fighters within flight range would be friendly, disregarded the I-16s. Everything proceeded according to plan. After a few more minutes, the oil depot came into view and the Russian dive bombers completed their mission. Turning towards Odessa for the long flight home, a pair of Messerschmitt fighters launched from a nearby airfield to give chase. The Russian pilots displayed fearless flying during a short dogfight and the pursuers quickly turned tail. All 4 I-16s made it back to Odessa, stopping to refuel on their way back to base. The Zveno SPB was ready for some real action, having proven its mettle in the face of enemy forces. After weeks of meticulous planning, the first 2 bridge raids unfolded on August 10, 1941. The I-16s, equipped with expanded fuel tanks, set their sights on the King Carol I Bridge, now known as the Anghel-Salingi Bridge, a vital rail link spanning the Danube. The bridge served as a crucial connection between northern and southern Romania, with a pipeline running alongside, transporting valuable diesel to the Constanța fuel depot and beyond. Despite one of the Zveno SPBs turning back due to mechanical issues, 2 pressed on with the mission. 15 kilometers off the Romanian coastline, the 4 I-16 fighters detached from their motherships after a total flight time of 5 hours and 10 minutes. Following the winding Danube, the dive bombers reached their target 15 minutes later. This time the Germans were more vigilant, filling the sky with flak and anti-aircraft machine gun fire as the fighters approached. Despite the challenging conditions, each of the 4 fighters took a shot at the bridge, managing to damage one of the sturdy support columns. They skillfully evaded the German defenses and safely returned to Odessa without incurring any losses. Just 3 days later, on the 13th, the same raid was conducted once more, and all 6 I-16s successfully reached their target. They scored 5 direct hits, demolishing a span of the bridge before flying back to Odessa without any casualties. With 2 significant victories against the Nazi forces in Romania, Soviet Navy officials took notice of Shubakov's circus. The remaining Zveno SPBs in storage were hastily retrieved and pressed into service. However, expanding Zveno operations posed challenges for aeronautical engineers. Despite the relative ease of installing trapezes onto TB3 bombers, very few had the powerful M34RN engines necessary to lift the overloaded I-16 dive bombers into the air. Each of these engines had an impressive output of 900 horsepower. Only 12 such TB3s were identified within the Red Army, mostly assigned to heavy transport operations. Although Admiral Kuznetsov of the Black Sea Fleet requisitioned an additional 10 M34RN equipped bombers from Stalin himself, these plans never materialized as the war took a turn for the worse, with Hitler's armies already besieging Leningrad. These shifting tides introduced new complexities to the Zveno project. The existing Zveno SPBs continued their service, building a formidable reputation for themselves. On the 17th of August 1941, they targeted and successfully destroyed a floating dock near Constanța. A subsequent raid on the 28th caught the advancing Germans off guard as the dive bombers struck several bridges spanning the Dnieper River. Just over a week later, however, the Zveno project faced its first wartime casualty. During a raid on additional river crossings in eastern Romania, an I-16 and Yak-1 escort fighter was shot down by anti-aircraft fire. Despite the setback, the bombing itself proved successful, further impeding the advance of German forces towards critical Soviet ports. As subsequent operations unfolded, the documentation of the Zveno SPBs became sparse or non-existent. The chaotic early days of Operation Barbarossa, marked by the destruction of numerous Soviet aircraft and fierce ground losses, resulted in breakdowns in communication and procedural documentation. While uncertainties surround the historical record, it is known that the Zveno SPBs executed at least 30 combat missions, frequently aiding the launch of overloaded fighters and dive bombers when not engaged in direct combat. Despite the resounding successes of these unconventional missions, Zveno was officially decommissioned sometime in 1942. The Soviet Air Force expressed concerns about the vulnerabilities of the long obsolete TB3s and I-16s. With the elements of surprise diminished, these early 1930s-style aircraft were deemed too vulnerable to the Luftwaffe's elite. The decision to retire Zveno reflected a strategic shift in response to the evolving nature of aerial warfare. Thus concluded a brief yet captivating era in aircraft history. The military use of a parasite aircraft being carried into active combat faded after the success of Zveno during the advance of Operation Barbarossa. However, the idea persisted, finding new life in Nazi Germany, where engineers, inspired by Zveno's achievements, embarked on creating their own version. They developed a rough prototype by coupling planes of the same size at the wingtip. This concept made its way to America through Operation Paperclip, with notable influence from Richard Voigt, an aircraft designer known throughout Europe for his notably ugly designs. The idea underwent testing in the United States, utilizing a Douglas C-47A and a pair of modified LFA target drones. This experimentation gave rise to several intriguing experimental aircraft, with the McDonnell XF-85 Goblin standing out as the most notable. This experimental parasite fighter was designed to accompany the famed Convair B-36 as a portable anti-aircraft defense. Another project that emerged was Project MS-1016, codenamed Tiptoe for its wingtip docking clamps. A handful of modified B-36s entered limited service with the 99th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing and the 91st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron between 1955 and 56. However, they proved to be more trouble than they were worth for their designated mission profile of bomber defense and high-altitude reconnaissance. The airborne aircraft carrier, while extinct in practical terms, persists as a compelling idea that captivates our imaginations. It stands as a testament to the audacious innovations and experimental spirit that characterize the early history of aviation. While the idea may currently reside in the realm of imagination, the dynamic landscape of technology and defense always holds the potential for remarkable innovation. The legacy of early experimental aircraft, particularly these, serve as a perennial source of inspiration, fueling the dream of pushing the boundaries of what is achievable in aerospace and military capabilities.